The case of UFO contactee Billy Meier has been an intriguing one for many decades and actually is still ongoing today, not just because of his crystal clear photographs of UFOs and footage of UFOs, but the prophecies and predictions conveyed to Billy during his encounters with human-looking extraterrestrials. Join me on Let's Talk Paranormal next. My guest today, Michael Horn, is the official American media representative for Billy Meier, a simple Swiss farmer who's been having UFO contacts since the age of 5. And Michael has been researching this case for nearly 25 years. He's also a musician, a songwriter, an inventor. He created nail art. He's also the creator of Sit and Get Fit video fitness program, and for the last 30 years has all of that experience with yoga, tai chi, qigong, and various massage. There really is no end to Michael's talents, but tonight he's here to discuss and share with us information about Billy Meier and why he feels the case is a valid one. Michael, thank you for joining us tonight. 62 years of contact. How did you meet Billy?
Well, actually, I met Billy 4 years ago for the first time, even though I'd been studying the case and all the information in it for many years before that, a little more than 20, actually. But I went to Switzerland because there was a group of people that would come every year to meet from around the world who were involved in studying the material. Even though I had done all of my work independently, I had decided just prior to that, by perhaps a half a year or so, to join a study group in LA that had a few people that were studying the material. And in that way, I could kind of officially go and meet him as part of the little tiny American contingent, and I mean a very tiny one, 3 people. So I had the opportunity, and I went, and I just got back from my 4th year of visiting.
Right. So what made the case valid to you that you felt that you wanted to go out and research this?
Well, of course, when I saw the first photo book, as a lot of people did in 1979, I had that feeling of this is real. Now, you can look at something and say this is real or it isn't real, but you can't make a conclusion that you can stand behind based simply on impressions from photographs, one way or the other. But there was more to it than that. There was, even in the first photo book, there was some of the investigative research that was done on the photography, on the on the metal samples, and information, quotes from the alleged extraterrestrials, and things that made sense to me. So I decided to find any and everything else I could on it. And at that time, there wasn't anything else. It wasn't until 7 years later that I was in a little cafe in Sedona, Arizona, ordering an alfalfa and sprout sandwich, you know, little health place. And my daughter and I and friends, we were the only people in there except for another fellow sitting in the back. And because it was a health food restaurant, you know, it takes a long time to make a little sandwich.
Of course.
So we got to speaking with each other, and turned out that he was a retired IRS agent. We talked about Sedona, UFOs, Billy Meier case came up, and before you knew it, he said, well, you know, when you get back to LA, why don't you come up and read the contact reports? I said, what's that? He said, well, you know those quotes from the ETs? I said, yeah. He says, there's almost 2,000 pages of conversations that Meier had with these people, and that's what it's taken from. And I said, yeah. So when I got back to LA, this is 86, I went up, and this guy gave me all this stuff, and I was reading it literally for weeks, partially because the translations were difficult,
right.
but primarily because they were so compelling and so interesting. And that's what drew me farther and farther, deeper and deeper into the case, because there was information in there and a tone and a reality to the conversations that defied, in my mind, a hoax.
So it just pulled you in. You felt that, this is valid. We need to investigate this further.
I want to know more. I want to know everything I can know about this.
Right. Let's have a look at some pictures of Billy.
Sure.
This is Billy that we have here.
Pretty much the way he looks these days.
Yeah, simple Swiss farmer.
So they say.
And he is handicapped, right? He has one arm?
Yes, he lost his arm. I believe it was in 1967 he lost his left arm. He had taken photographs of UFOs prior to that in India in 1964. The amazing thing in this case is that after he lost his arm, when he became disabled, the physical evidence became more abundant and better than when he had two arms. So
right.
How do you start becoming a better hoaxer, if that was the case?
Right. So that probably started to happen deliberately to prove to...
I've often said that, for the people who are skeptics, the only way this could be more obviously real is if Billy only had no arms and did it all with his jaws or something.
Which would be a little bit impossible to do, I think.
Just a wee bit.
Yeah. And this is his hometown of Switzerland?
Well, actually, this is one of the lovely shots of Switzerland, but not his hometown. It was just such a pretty shot, I had to use it.
Right.
But it's representative, of course, of the beauty of Switzerland and not far from where he does live. Mm-hmm. And this is indeed the little facility or farmhouse that he and his family live in with a couple other people and work in. And it's a beautiful place. I was just walking there days ago.
Right. On a recent trip.
On a recent trip. And one of the little towns very nearby, quiet little Swiss villages. Not a lot of people. People very aware of who comes and goes. A very nicely spread out rural and rugged area. Mm-hmm. Very difficult area for people.
How well is Billy known in Switzerland? Do they know who
Well,
he is?
in the immediate region, he's known quite well. As a matter of fact, what a lot of people don't know is that even the Swiss military, on a regular basis, have people coming and consulting with him on various things.
Really?
He's extremely knowledgeable in areas that would far exceed your expectations or mine of what a so-called simple Swiss farmer should be knowing about. But when you throw into the mix that he's, at this point, I can say we've conclusively proved he's a real UFO contactee.
Right.
Then it's no longer so surprising that he should have the knowledge he does.
Now, why do you think Billy has been chosen, Michael? Why not the U.S. president?
It's funny you pick that example because the story is that after Billy had been working with the extraterrestrials for some time, an approach was made to a government, and I think it was the U.S. But the terms were that the ETs would interact with the government through their intermediary, who would be Billy. This was unacceptable to the egos of the government people, and we missed out on an interaction and a benefit, perhaps, to all of humanity because of some people's enormous egos that they couldn't tolerate that a lesser man would stand between them.
Right.
So why Billy?
Interesting.
The case has a lot of things in it. I divide them in two categories: facts and speculation. Mm-hmm. So the answer has to fall into the realm of speculation because it's based on reincarnation, which is not yet to us a fact of life. Excuse me. Apparently to the extraterrestrials it is, and Billy, not the person but the spirit, the eternal part of him, that we all have an eternal spirit. Mm-hmm. That spirit form or spirit has a very, very ancient past and one that has served as a prophet at different times on our world historically in the past.
Right.
Now, that's, as I say, that's speculative. Nobody has to believe this type of thing, but this is the answer they give, and at some point maybe we'll be able to verify that type of thing with reincarnation, all the rest of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Let's take a look at some of the craft that Billy has photographed. Mm-hmm. And I believe that these people are Plejarians?
Yes, that's actually what they are called, formerly referred to as Pleiadians, because it was part of a deliberate approach on the part of the extraterrestrials and Billy to use this word Pleiadian because they come from the direction of the Pleiades star system, but in an altered space and time continuum because the Pleiades that we see from Earth are not inhabitable. These are little, blue suns or something. Mm-hmm. And so I am not all that knowledgeable about altered time and space continuums. Suffice it to say that they use the term Pleiadian so that anybody that would start to claim contact or channeling with Pleiadians subsequent to Billy would be shown to be a fake, a hoaxer. There are no Pleiadians.
There are no Pleiadians.
Zip.
Right. Well, have they explained to Billy why they're here?
Yes. And this is kind of, I've encapsulated the idea in terms of calling it the Meier contacts, the key to our future survival. And I mean it absolutely literally, our future survival. This isn't about space brothers coming to save us. It's not about ascension and fourth dimensions and other things like this, which they simply say are not realities. These are not real things. What's real is we are third-dimensional people. Yes, there's many dimensions. Yes, there's much to discover and learn, but we're going to do it here on this planet. They are here to try to assist us to prevent us from killing ourselves off, basically.
Right. So they're concerned with how we interact with one another and the planet, how we're treating the planet. How
we treat the planet, and especially the events that are unfolding now as we speak and have been for some time that pertain to the world and the wars. They've written about this, and some of the prophecies about this are literally ancient prophecies, and it's a huge focal point of the case.
Well, as we can see here, Michael, these photographs are very clear. Let's just take another look here. Look at this one above the car, the truck.
And that's a very interesting craft. It has the ability, apparently, to travel through time as well as space. Many, if not actually most, of Meier's photos are taken with other objects nearby, in front of, behind, for reference. So that people who could discern this, as well as the people who did the analysis in the photographs, could determine that they were indeed large, real objects, and that they were not hoaxed model.
You could understand, Michael, that somebody would be very skeptical of seeing that picture.
Oh, sure.
That it's computer-generated, perhaps? Or?
Yeah, the only problem is that when Meier took the photos between 75 and 79, there were no computers hanging around for people to play with and manipulate. There was no Photoshop. Of course. None of it existed. And Meier is living not in Hollywood. Meier is living in a remote Swiss village with no resources to fake things.
What does Billy say when people tend to be very skeptical about all of these pictures?
Well, of course, Billy always says people should be free to decide for themselves. This is not to be forced on people. That's why if these people are real, certainly they could land or show up anywhere, anytime. But we are supposed to do the work to determine for ourselves whether these are real. Now, of course, I should mention that a good number of the photographs were subjected to the most rigorous photo analysis, and I have a free report that I put on a website. People can just look at that stuff because it comes from a book, 1980 or 81, from the original investigative team. And recently, as a matter of fact, in 2001, February, I challenged the top international professional skeptics organization to duplicate only one of his photos and one of his films because they said it was an easily duplicated hoax.
Right.
Months went by after they'd accepted the challenge, and nothing was forthcoming. I told them at that point, instead of worrying about using cameras, you could go to computer, do anything you want. Well, it was well over 3 years. And after that period of time, they finally came out with 6 photos, that bore no resemblance to just visually. I mean, they looked like nice little things floating, but they weren't with trees in front. They didn't have the challenge. Nonetheless, I said, okay. They said, see, we've duplicated the effect. And I said, well, a science fiction movie can duplicate the effect, but aren't you aware that, we've got parameters here? Well, they didn't want to hear about it, and I was on a big radio show for 4 hours one night talking about their failure to duplicate. One of the guys called in, and the host of the show challenged him to have his photos analyzed as Meier's were, and he refused publicly.
Really?
At that point, the skeptical challenge to the Meier case bit the dust.
Who were the people that actually analyzed these pictures?
Well, this is an interesting thing. The investigative team went into facilities. They had to sign confidentiality agreements. We know that there were organizations that lent them some help, including persons from JPL, NASA, Michael Mallon of the Mars mission looked at the photos. Robert Post, special effects expert named Wally Gentleman from the Canadian Film Board. The equipment that was used was itemized. It was enormously expensive at the time. They used the best, quality equipment that was available for this type of thing, but they couldn't, by virtue of agreement, let people know exactly all the details of who and what was being used for the examination. It's I guess a proprietary type of agreement, and I just today got another email on that from the lead investigator in the case. But the kind of equipment that was used is well laid out, and the parameters are enormously long. I don't blame the skeptics for not subjecting; they wouldn't have passed.
Right. Just go on to another picture or two, and then I'd like to show you some footage.
Sure.
Our viewers at home to see some footage when I can get this here. Oops. We have another one by a tree right here. Now, wasn't there a model UFO found on the property of Meier?
Sure. As a matter of fact, models were brought over, by the investigative team.
Right.
They were deliberately made. They spent several $100s on Hollywood, quality models, so that they could test and photograph them in the same locations that the Meier photos were taken in, and then submit them to computer analysis to see if indeed they could discern the difference. Meier tried to make a model and shot snapshots of it, and basically threw the pictures away in disgust because it was of such obvious and inferior quality.
Right.
But he was trying to figure out how, could I even make something that looks as good as the real thing? But this whole thing of they found models, well, yeah, they made models deliberately.
But the models were made after the contacts.
Oh, yeah, after the photos would have been taken.
Right.
Well, most of them, yeah.
Right. Didn't his ex-wife say that he was making up the whole story?
That was after a couple of interesting things. After she and 15 other people had passed lie detection tests that the case was real, after she had done a video interview to the effect of it, and also after she and he, were parting company as a married couple. I understand those things sometimes happen between people.
Of course.
That, things occur where suddenly there's a little animosity or bitterness or what have you. And see, this isn't a case about perfect beings. This is a case about human beings. And because of that, everything that could go wrong went wrong, including with the extraterrestrials, which I was just talking to Billy about last week. And we have to remember that these ideas of everything being perfect come from our conditioning, basically from religions and unreal type of thinking that this is not involved with.
Right. Can we have a look at the footage that we have of Billy's UFO, that we can show everyone?
Here you see one of Mr. Meier's 8mm movie segments of a UFO taken in 1978. Notice the two separate lights that momentarily flash on the cupola and the flanging of the ship. Mr. Meier and his wife recorded the sounds you are hearing in 1980 on a cassette machine, outdoors with 15 witnesses present.
That was interesting footage that we just saw there, Michael. We're now going to see a second piece of footage where Billy's zooming in on the actual UFO by the tree.
Yes.
So let's take a look at that.
Here is a video segment from 1981 of one of the most unusual UFOs ever seen, photographed, or filmed. If there's any doubt that the object is indeed a large unknown craft of some sort, watch as Mr. Meier zooms in on it from across the meadow, perhaps some 300 feet or so. Okay.
Was Billy alone when he took that?
No.
Who was there?
The man who was the base commander for the extraterrestrials, named Quetzal, was standing to his left off camera.
Okay.
That segment, there's more to it, and he speaks to him. He asked him to move the ship around the tree, and Quetzal said, just shook his head. No, he doesn't speak out loud. They also can communicate telepathically. But Meier wanted a little more proof for people, but they always, hold something back, a little bit here and there, so that they don't force people to have to believe it. This still leaves room for people to be skeptical, even though I haven't seen anybody duplicate that for either.
But wouldn't it have been so great if the extraterrestrial would have stepped in front of the camera and just said, "Here I am"?
Sure, but it probably would have thrown the focus of the case off. It's not to be about them. And they said to Billy, there are, for instance, in the book, there's a couple photographs of one of the extraterrestrial women, just excluding the face. You can see the hair, the arm, the gold suit, holding the weapon, what have you, but they don't want their faces photographed. They said, Earth people have a tendency to shift their focus to personalities, to deify people, to make cults and religions. That happened in the past when their own forefathers were here, setting themselves up as the gods of our religious history. And part of the reason they're here now is to try to assist us to extricate ourselves from that kind of thinking and all the negative consequences that the past several thousand years have been.
So they're here for different purposes.
Yeah, it's certainly not to become celebrities for us.
Of course, the media is making it that way, though.
Well,
especially with grey beings, You go into a supermarket now and you see little snacks, UFO snacks, and grey alien lollipops and pens and you name it, and we've got it.
Well, part of that is deliberate in the sense of a long-term gradual indoctrination of humanity to the possibility of the existence of other life forms. So the Plejaren themselves had been instrumental in helping to seed ideas that would be picked up by people who wrote movies or science fiction or anything else, so that we could, from the late 40s, early 50s on, start to let this thought come in to our consciousness, for better, for worse. We would view extraterrestrials as evil villains and strange aliens, cute little guys, and all the rest of it in between. But over and over and over again, the message is you're not alone in the universe.
Right. Now, Billy had some other proof. He had some metal that was given to him by one of the Plejarens. Let's take a look at that footage that a scientist is talking about.
Sure.
And here's a brief segment of a video in which Marcel Vogel, a high-level patent-holding IBM scientist, comments on the remarkable metal alloy samples given to him by Meier, which he has just analyzed.
Marcel Vogel, a senior scientist and chemist with IBM, had been carefully analyzing the tiny metal fragments Semyasa had given Billy. Metallurgical analysis had revealed the presence of the rare earth element thulium, but it was through the lens of a scanning electron microscope that Vogel made his most amazing discoveries.
I could not explain the type of material that I have and its discreteness by any known combination of materials. I could not put it together myself as a scientist. If I were to take these combinations and put it into a furnace, melt it, then pour it out and pull a little ingot, I would see all of these elements present there in any one area. But I don't. I see this discrete bits of material. Now, it can only happen by some form of a cold fusion process where you have the elements present and you fuse them together so they still maintain their identity, but they interpenetrate into one another. It's also a challenge because I showed it to one of my friends who was a metallurgist, and he shook his head. He said, I don't see how it can be put together. And that's where we are right now. And I think it's important that those of us who are in the scientific world sit down and do some serious study on these things instead of putting it off as figments of people's imagination.
Could I say this material is extraterrestrial?
It doesn't look like anything that we've made here. At this moment, I would feel very much inclined to accept what was given to me as being true.
I see.
I respect the people I've met so far, their integrity, their willingness to work. Mr. De La Tosa in his work on photography, and Mr. Stevens, the way he has done his best to give me specimens. We have all done this for one thing, to serve and to find out what truth
Wow. Where is that metal today?
Those metal samples no longer exist. They magically disappeared from a safe at IBM.
No.
Yes, yes. See, this is part of the reason why generally when I talk about this case, I say, look, this is either the biggest and most impenetrable hoax or hands down the most important story in all of human history. There's nothing in the middle here.
Mm-hmm. Did Billy say why they gave him a piece of metal? What the purpose?
They wanted to provide a little more physical proof so that we can't take this all in. If you look at the Meier case over even the past 25 or 30 years, you realize there have been 19 documented assassination attempts on this man's life.
Really?
19.
I wasn't aware of that.
Oh yeah, he's been dodging bullets and knives and hatchets and you name it. Humanity as a mass consciousness really isn't ready to have thrust upon us the reality of extraterrestrial life. And they're not here to thrust themselves upon us. They wanted to build a base of credibility for other reasons. And that has to do with our future survival. So they have gone through a very painstaking and slow and laborious process that's caused them and Meier enormous difficulties as human beings. And it's all been written and transcribed, and that's a good part of it.
Right. And do the U.S. government know of Billy's case? I take it that they do.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, when I spoke with Wendell a few weeks ago, he told me that some years back, Wendell Stevens, the lead investigator on this case, he was talking to a high-up in the unofficial government who told him that they'd been surveying and observing Meier for years. They couldn't penetrate the group, but they'd taken photographs of the UFOs themselves.
Really?
And when I saw Billy a few days ago, he verified that that was true, and he knew the Americans had been observing him.
Wow. Michael, I thank you for coming on the show today. We're going to have you back next week because we're going to do part 2 of the prophecies and predictions that were given to Billy. And in the meantime, if our viewers log on to your website, they can catch this book, And Still They Fly, at your website, which is
theyfly.com. I've got my book, not my book, but the book and my DVD there, and we'll be able to give them. There's a lot of information, totally free stuff, more than a dozen articles that they can research themselves and just start to find out what this means to them. Theyfly.com. That's
right. And check out my website too, letstalkparanormal.com. You'll find more about Michael and Billy on there. And until next week, keep your eyes to the skies. Bye-bye. So how have these contacts changed Billy, Michael?
Well, it's a hard thing to say because let's remember he started his contacts when he was 5 years old. But in terms of what he's written about it, it produced stresses for him with other people in his life, with the people at school and all this, because he couldn't tell the kids, and he became more introverted in certain ways. At the same time that he was having these troubles, it was because he was having these experiences with the extraterrestrials who were tutoring him. And by the time he was 7 years old, he was told he had the thinking capacity of a 35-year-old man.
Really? When they presented themselves to him, did they say they were extraterrestrials? How did they...
The way it actually all began was his father and he had been outside, and they noticed a strange-looking object go, flying through the skies, a silvery disc. He asks his father what it is. His father says, "I don't know, I think it's a weapon from Hitler." This is 1942. And that was forgotten about, sort of, by the father, but not by Billy. Then shortly thereafter, Billy felt, he was outside playing, and he felt drawn to go into the woods. He was getting a sense inside his head that he heard somebody talking to him. This is kind of compressing the story a bit. He went into the woods, and there was a man, an old man, standing in what looked like a diver's suit to Billy. deep-sea diver, in front of a pear-shaped craft.
Right.
And it began his contacts with this man named Svath. And Svath was his first extraterrestrial teacher. He could not talk to anybody about it except to the parish priest, Mr. Rudolph, or Father Rudolph Zimmerman. Mm-hmm. And it was this man who supported Billy enormously.
Which is this man here.
That's right.
On the front of the book. This is the priest.
That's right. I picked up the book. It's in German, and I just picked it up in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And there's a picture of Billy as a child and mm-hmm. Billy as an older man.
Right.
And there were a couple other people that Billy was able to confide in, but it was a very small number. And his life became quite a split experience of having this teachings and being tutored and meeting with this man in the craft, sometimes taken up above the earth mm-hmm. and shown things and educated. It sounds like science fiction to us.
Yeah, it does. Mm-hmm. It does.
It was his experience, and it lasted with this teacher telepathically and physically for a few years, and then his voice faded before he was gone totally from Billy's life. Billy was told that when he was about 16, the next teacher would appear, and that was a woman named Asket.
Right. There is also a photograph of a lady in here. What is her name again?
Pobal Chang.
That's right. She apparently saw Billy walking and talking with an extraterrestrial female.
Quite a credible person. I think it's her grandfather was the head of an ashram in Marauli, India. I think it's called the Ashoka Ashram. Billy was there around 1964. Mm-hmm. And during that time, Billy had not only photographs, he was taking photographs of up to 8 of the craft above the ashram, but he was meeting with this woman, Asket, and he was walking around with her on the grounds and all. And Pobal was a young woman at the time herself. And not only did she remember, and there were other witnesses as well, she's just become the most prominent one. Not only did she see Billy walking with Asket, but she said Asket used to come into her room at night and sing her to sleep and stroke her hair.
Really?
And she said she had long blonde hair, and I guess she was wearing a gold suit or something. Pobal Chang only fairly recently kind of reemerged. She's a retired diplomat, I think, from the UN, and a very credible person. There are well over 100 witnesses to the ships. That's,
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you, because here we have one person seeing Billy with the extraterrestrial. Mm-hmm. What about when he's been filming the ships?
Well, for the most part, Billy could only go directly to the contacts and the filmings and what have you by himself, though he was allowed oftentimes to let people drive him up to a certain proximity. Mm-hmm. So over time, not only in Switzerland but other places, these ships were seen by, as I say, well over 100 people, and there's at least 4 other photographers of the ships. Some of the people who accompanied Billy in the car on a cold wintry night or whatever saw the ship either come or go, or saw Billy literally disappear standing in the middle of a field, mm-hmm. or reappear miles away, inexplicably totally dry during a rainstorm. And these are the kind of stories that have made the case fascinating and driven the skeptics crazy too.
Right. Wasn't Billy given a piece of metal from the extraterrestrials?
A good number of pieces of metal. As a matter of fact, he still has some.
Now, why would an extraterrestrial give him a piece of metal?
Well,
what was the purpose?
Just like he was given photo opportunities and filming opportunities and sound recording opportunities, they gave him some physical, metal samples, which were alloys, right. for the purposes of letting them be analyzed, so that it could add to the credibility of Meier's claims without still forcing the proof. Mm-hmm. So those metal samples are quite compelling because they were examined by a notoriously brilliant scientist named Marcel Vogel.
Right. Now we're going to see a footage of that interview with Marcel Vogel.